Imagine hiking for 3 days through an unforgiving Alaskan blizzard. Your fingers are frostbitten, your lungs are burning, you're entirely alone. Then, you crest a ridge and you see it. Half buried in decades of solid ice is a massive commercial airliner, a plane that officially vanished 50 years ago. But when you finally pry open the frozen doors, you don't find passengers. You don't find pilots. You find $50 million in solid gold, a flattened bullet casing, and an empty cockpit that proves whoever flew this plane didn't crash. They landed it on purpose. This is the impossible mystery of Plane 66. And the most terrifying part? The man who found it didn't stumble there by accident. He was invited. The wind cut through Philip's jacket like a blade. Every step up the mountain felt like dragging iron. Philip was an environmental researcher. At least that was his cover story. He had told his colleagues back at base camp that he was hiking up to this remote ridge to install a satellite weather monitor. A routine, boring assignment. That was a lie. Philip was actually a man obsessed. He had risked his career, his safety, and his life to be on this mountain, chasing a ghost. And as he finally wiped the ice from his goggles and looked out across the plateau, the ghost materialized. There it was, a commercial airliner, trapped like a steel fossil in the glacier. Philip dropped to his knees, his heart hammered against his ribs. It was real. It was actually real. He desperately wanted to go inside, but the rational part of his brain screamed at him. He was alone. The ice shelf was unstable. If he fell into a crevasse, he'd be swallowed by the mountain, unfound until spring. His hands shaking, Philip pulled a flare gun from his coat. He aimed at the gray sky and pulled the trigger. He just had to hope his colleagues at base camp were watching. To understand why Philip lied to his team, we have to rewind exactly 3 weeks. Philip had been sitting in his Seattle apartment, feeling like a failure. He had spent his entire career researching historical anomalies and cold cases, only to be mocked by his peers. He was on the verge of quitting. Then he checked his mail. There was a blank envelope. No return address, no stamp. Someone had hand-delivered it. Inside was a single sheet of heavy, textured paper. Written in careful black ink were exactly 20 words. Plane 66 waits, where no one looks. You were chosen to find it. Tell no one. Come alone below the message, GPS coordinates pointing to a dead zone in the Alaskan wilderness. Philip felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. You were chosen. It was the validation he had spent his whole life desperate for. Someone out there had watched his work. Someone believed in him. He packed a bag that night. After a flight to Anchorage, Philip took a bus to a town so isolated it didn't appear on digital maps, a crumbling settlement of weathered cabins and dead-eyed locals. When he asked the bartender at a local diner about Plane 66, the room went dead silent. People looked at him like he'd just invited the devil inside. But as Philip left, a frail old man with cloudy eyes grabbed his sleeve. Plane 66, the old man whispered, his voice trembling, took off in 1972, classified cargo. 30 minutes after takeoff, it vanished without a single distress call. They said it was a storm, but there was no storm. Philip leaned in. What do you think happened? The old man looked out the window toward the jagged mountains. I think that plane landed exactly where it was supposed to, and someone made sure it stayed buried. Before Philip could ask another question, the man slipped away into the snow. That night, Philip found a second note pinned to his cabin door with a hunting knife. Follow the mountain path. Find Theo. 2 hours after Philip fired his flare, a helicopter thundered over the ridge. Lincoln and Greg, Philip's colleagues from base camp, rappelled down into the snow. They had come to rescue a lost researcher. Instead, they found themselves staring at a 50-year-old aviation miracle. Look at the tail, Greg stammered, his breath fogging in the cold. Barely visible under the frost were 2 digits. 66. The windows are blacked out from the inside, Lincoln noted, tracing a gloved hand over the glass. Someone didn't want the passengers looking out. Or, Philip said softly, they didn't want anyone looking in. It took them 6 hours with ice picks and a blowtorch to force open the emergency. Exit. Philip climbed inside first. The air in the cabin was dead. It smelled of ozone, rust, and 50 years of undisturbed freeze. Ice crystals hung from the ceiling like chandeliers. But there were no passenger seats. Instead, the entire cabin was filled with heavy wooden crates, dozens of them strapped to the floor. Greg pried one of the crates open with a crowbar. The men stopped breathing. Gold, rows and rows of solid gold bars, millions of dollars worth. This wasn't a passenger flight, Lincoln whispered, terrified. This was a Cold War smuggling operation. But Philip wasn't looking at the gold. He was kneeling on the floor, picking up a small metallic object from the frost. It was a 9mm bullet casing, flattened by impact. A heavy, suffocating dread settled over Philip. He unholstered his flashlight and slowly made his way to the front of the plane. To the cockpit, he forced the cockpit door open. Empty. No bodies, no bones, no signs of a struggle. The instruments were perfectly intact. They bailed, Greg said from behind him. They parachuted out before it crashed. It didn't crash, Philip said. He pointed to the altimeter and the landing gear levers. The gear is locked. The flaps are angled. Whoever flew this landed it perfectly on the ice shelf. Philip looked down at the center console. The protective housing for the flight data recorder, the black box, had been unscrewed. The magnetic tape spool inside was gone. Someone had been here before them. The sound of snowmobile engines shattered the silence. Philip looked out the blacked-out windows. A dozen heavily armed state troopers and federal agents were cresting the ridge, weapons drawn. "How the hell did they know we were up here?" Greg panicked. Philip's stomach dropped. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The letters, the coordinates. The old man in the diner, Theo. Whoever sent those letters never wanted Philip to keep the gold. The sender knew the plane was here, but for some reason, age, fear, or someone watching them, they couldn't risk coming up the mountain themselves. They couldn't excavate the plane alone. They needed a proxy. A desperate, obsessive researcher who would do all the heavy lifting, break the ice, and open the tomb. And the moment Philip had departed for the mountain, the sender had anonymously tipped off the authorities, perfectly timing it so the police would arrive right as the doors were open. Philip, Lincoln, and Greg surrendered without a fight. In the weeks that followed, Plane 66 became a global sensation. Declassified documents eventually confirmed it was a ghost flight moving black-budget gold reserves out of the country. But the identities of the pilots were never found. The magnetic data tape was never recovered, and the anonymous sender simply ceased to exist. Philip and his colleagues were entirely cleared of wrongdoing. In fact, they became famous. They wrote a book that topped the bestseller lists. Philip got the validation and the legendary career he always dreamed of. But it cost him his peace of mind. He is an old man now, but he still lies awake at night, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the same questions. Who chose him? Why did they trust him with a secret buried for half a century? And who was holding the missing flight tape? Some mysteries, Philip learned, aren't meant to be solved. They are meant to be carried. The sender of those letters had carried a heavy, terrifying truth for 50 years. And when they could no longer bear the weight, they passed it on to Philip. Not for glory, not for gold, but because some secrets simply refused to stay buried. If you were Philip, would you have gone up that mountain alone? Let me know in the comments below. Who do you think sent those letters? Was it one of the original pilots? A government whistleblower? Or someone else entirely? If this story gave you chills, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. We dive into the unknown every single week. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.